Good morning to all of you. Um, Welcome to National Resource Center, Department of Mass Communication, Tezpur University. Myself, Dr. Neel Roy, Head and Associate Professor, Department of Education, Tezpur University. In our previous discussion, we have talked about some teaching methodology techniques such as pedagogy to andragogy. In this session, I will discuss about andragogy to heutagogy. This is the paradigm shifts. In our earlier discussion, it is found that effective teaching requires the teacher to consider what the students know, to communicate clearly, to learn, and to stimulate them to learn, think, communicate, and perhaps in their turn to stimulate their teachers. In short, to teach effectively, you must know your subject, know your students, learn, and how to teach. There is a revolution occurring in the way in which people learn. This revolution is affecting our educational and training system. Teachers and trainers of that system, workplace and other organization, other social system and learners. Creating competent and capable learners are critical to life in the rapidly changing educational system. Pedagogical, even andragogical educational methods are no longer sufficient in preparing learners for thriving in the workplace, and a more self-determined approach is needed, especially for the millennial learners or the generation Y. Millennials are the individuals born from 1982 to 2000. This generation of students have shorter attention span and prefer interactive and collaborative learning. They prefer autonomy and are very comfortable with technology. Core workplace values for this generation includes online social media connectedness, teamwork, free expression, creativity, work-life balance and use of technology. The major challenge for educator is that majority of our learners belong to the millennial generation, while most faculty belongs to the baby boomer or generation X cohorts. The change in the traits and needs of the learner forces the educational system to adapt to the learner and not vice versa. Heutagogy is a self-determined approach of learning which suits and caters to the needs of the millennial generations. In this approach, the learner needs to reflect on what is learned and how it is learned, and educator teach learner how to teach themselves. In the past 40 years or so, there has been a quiet revolution in education through research in to how people learn, and resulting from that further work on how teaching could be or should be provided. While andragogy provides many useful approaches for improving educational methodology and indeed has been accepted almost universally, it still has connotation of a teacher-learner relationship. It may be argued that the rapid rate of change in society and the so-called information explosion suggest that we should now be looking at an educational approach where it is the learner himself who determines what and how learning should take place. Heutagogy, the study of self-determined learning, may be viewed as a natural progression from earlier educational methodologies, in particular from capability development, and may well provide the optimal approach to learning in the 21st century. The distinction Wallace in 1970 made between how adults and children learn was an important landmark in teaching and learning practices in vocational education and training and in higher education. Heutagogy is defined as the study of self-determined learning and was developed as an extension to andragogy or self-directed learning. One of the difference between andragogy and heutagogy is that heutagogy further expands upon the role of human agency in the learning process. Thus, the learner is seen as the major agent in their own learning, which occurs as a result of personal experiences. The learner and teacher or learning leader work in partnership as the learner negotiates what is he or she will learn and how she or he will learn it. The learner is the center of the learning process rather than the teacher or the curriculum. The principles of heutagogy. The first principles of heutagogy is learner centered and learner determined. The role of human agency in learning is a fundamental principle. The learner is at the center of all heutagogic practice. The learner is self-motivated and autonomous and primarily responsible for deciding what will be learned and how it will be learned and assessed. The second principles of heutagogy is capability. Capability is characterized by the following: being able to use one's competencies in unfamiliar as well as familiar circumstances, learner self-efficacy, communication, creativity, collaboration and positive values. That the third principles of heutagogy is self-reflection and metacognition. Within heutagogy, it is essential that reflection occurs in a holistic way. This translates to the learner reflecting not only what she or he has learned, but also the way in which it has been learned and understanding how it is learned, that is known as metacognition. The fourth principle, that is double loop learning. Double loop learning requires that learners are both psychologically and behaviorally engaged. They reflect on not only what they have learned, but also way in which this new knowledge and the path to learning have influenced their values and belief system. Number fifth, non-linear learning and teaching. As learning is self-determined, the path to learning is defined by the learner and is not established by the teacher. As a result of learners choosing their own path, learning happens in an non-linear format. There is a difference between andragogical and heutagogical approach. In andragogical approach, the focus is the content, whereas in the heutagogical approach, the learning is process based. And also we have seen that andragogical approach, that is the self-directed learning, whereas in heutagogical approach the learning is self-determined. In andragogy, instructors or the learners are coordinated, where both learner as well as teachers are work together. Both the groups are involved together, that is coordinating to each other. Whereas in andragogy, whereas in heutagogy, learners are self-directed. They don't need to be guided by the teacher. Andragogy is single loop learning, means that is the problem oriented. If problem occurs, they will try to find out the solution. Whereas in heutagogy, that is double loop learning. Here the students will also learn how the problem is solved and what are the causes, that will also be learned. In andragogy, that linear learning is designed, it goes straight. It goes straight, that step by step, systematically, sequentially it will go. Whereas in Heutagogy, non-linear learning design means the students may get the ideas or they may learn it from the different sources, that is non-linear. In Andragogy, competency is developed, the competency of the students are developed, they need to learn certain skills to become competent, whereas in Heutagogy, the students will develop their capability. The Heutagogic design process. Every teacher must know what is the heutagogical process design, means how heutagogical approach works. Where to begin in realizing a heutagogic design in your classroom training environment, that has to be known by every teacher. A first step is to understand the process of designing for heutagogy. Next, it is important to understand how to develop heutagogic learning environment. The first part of heutagogic design process is defining the learning contract. During this phase, the learner and the teachers work together to identify learning needs and outcomes. They face two different questions in this phase, such as what does the learner want to learn or achieve through this course, what should be the result of the learning experiences, or you can say the learning outcomes. In addition, specific course or program learning outcomes that may be required by the institutional environment should be taken into consideration. Next, the learner and teacher negotiate the assessment process. In this phase, both the learner and teachers, they will negotiate about the assessment process. How will learning be assessed and who will assess it? In other words, how do we know that learning has been achieved? The curriculum should then be adapted to the learning outcomes as well as throughout the learning process. At the end of this part of the process, a learner contract is created and agreed upon. The next part of the process is developing of the learning activity. Dick in 2013 identifies three universal aspects in this activity, such as challenge, autonomy and support. To be successful in this design process, teachers need to create a challenging, achievable and worthwhile task, providing participants with as much autonomy as possible and engendering support based on strong and collaborative relationships. In the last part of the heutagogic design process, learning is assessed in order to determine whether the agreed upon outcomes have been achieved. How learning is assessed is based on the learner contract defined at the start of the process. Learning outcomes are reviewed and assessed, and specific competencies and skills acquired are identified. As Heutagogy is learner centered, the learner is the primary assessor of his or her learning. In thinking about designing for Heutagogy, a number of design principles for learning can be applied, no matter what the context is. This can be summarized as follows. Learners needs to be involved in negotiating what and how they learn throughout the design and learning process. Curricula should be flexible and take into account learners' questions and motivations and how thinking shifts as a result of things they have learned. The learner and teacher need to work together to negotiate how learning outcomes will be assessed. Evaluation could be also include forms of participative or you can say self and peer evaluation, allowing learners to learn from each other and throughout self reflection. The role of the teacher is to guide the learner, providing formative feedback that is personalized according to the learner needs. Step by step, the teacher has to give the feedback, each and every steps. What is their progress, where is their problems, so why there is a problems, all these things the teacher has to give them as a feedback. The learning environment needs to incorporate opportunities for learners to explore and reflect on what they have learned and how they have learned. Heutagogic design process, it has certain elements which are very much essential to know by a teacher. First element is explore. Fundamental to heutagogy is the element of exploration. Learners must be given the freedom and opportunity to explore a variety of paths and sources of knowledge on their journey. They need to be able to develop and test hypotheses and ask and answer questions, all of which arise during the process of exploring. The second element, that is create. One useful learning approach is creating mind map. Within the online environment, learner can use a variety of tools to create mind maps of their learning. The third element, collaborate. Collaboration is another key element to heutagogy and aims to provide the kind of environment where learner can learn from each other. If there is a collaborative classroom, within the classroom, there is a ample scope to learn the better things, the more things about the concepts. Connect. Networks and connections are a critical aspect within heutagogy, as it is through this connection that new avenues of learning can be created. As much as they can connect with others, they will learn better things, the more things. The next elements, that is share. Once learners have started connecting, they can begin sharing. Numerous Web 2.0 tools are available for this purpose, such as SlideShare, ResearchGate, Twitter, Facebook, etc., etc. So, more sharing their knowledge, more learning scopes. Reflect. Finally, within every heutagogic learning environment, learner need to have opportunities to reflect. This is where there is a potential for new learning to occur and previous learning to be consolidated. Now, why this heutagogic approach or why heutagogic techniques are essential in the higher education? In higher education, nowadays we have seen that due to the explosion of knowledge and due to the use of ICT, information technology, the heutagogic approach is very much essential for higher education. Why? Because information is readily and easily accessible. We cannot restrict the students within the classroom, that we cannot make them bound that they have to learn the things whatever being discussed in the classroom itself, because in the present time the world is having the available sources of knowledge and all this knowledge can be accessed. So, since the informations are available, since the access also available, so this heutagogic approach should be adopted in the higher education. The change is so rapid that traditional methods of training and education are totally inadequate. If you see the traditional practices of teaching in higher education, that is the face-to-face mode, the lecture method, then the discussion method, group discussion, etc., etc. But all these techniques are no more useful for the wise generation learner. Wise generation learner, they are very habituated with the using of different smart devices. So, through their smart devices, they can access different knowledge related to their syllabus, related to their content from the different sources. So, since the knowledge are available, so we should not restrict them to the classroom. Third, discipline based knowledge is inappropriate to prepare for living in modern communities and workplace. Now, the term multidisciplinary as well as interdisciplinary approach are welcomed in the higher education. Nowadays, only one discipline knowledge is not adequate for our future life, and to become effective or to become good citizen or to be very competent enough in our present life, we must know the various, we must have the knowledge from the various field, from the various discipline, and which is possible only through the heutagogical approach. Heutagogical approach will allow the students to learn about different subject as per their own choice and as per their own interest. Learning is increasingly aligned with what we do. Modern organizational structure requires flexible learning practices. In modern time, we should not we should not create the learning environment very complex. We should not restrict the classroom, we should not restrict the learner also. Rather, our learning environment, classroom should be little bit flexible, so that flipped classrooms or flipped techniques as well as blended learning techniques can also be applied in the present system. A heutagogical approach recognizes the need to be flexible in the learning. Heutagogical approach, why it is necessary? Because in heutagogical approach allows the students to become little bit flexible. In heutagogical approach, the teachers provide resources, but the learner designs the actual course he or she might take by negotiating the learning. Here you will become the teachers will become the facilitator, where you will give the scope, where you will give them, where you will show the paths, and they have to design and they have to negotiate different sources, different the knowledge, and they will learn. Thus, learner might read around critical issues or questions and determine what is of interest and relevance to them, and then negotiate further reading and assessment tasks. Heutagogical approach will allow the students that what more they need to learn. It is not that teacher will guide them each and every moment, rather as per their demand or as per their requirement, the students will explore the world, or they will connect with the different groups, they will share their ideas, and they will be able to learn more things, more relevant things. With respect to the latter, assessment becomes more of a learning experience rather than means to measure attainment. Here, the assessment doesn't means to give the marks only, to give the grade only. Rather, assessment means what they have learned, how they have learned, all these things should be assessed. Research finding, I'd like to mention here one of the research findings that is in UK, Canine and Callan in 2010. They have done a research work in UK. They have applied the heutagogical approaches in their higher education, and what they have found in their research, these are like, this approach supports learner control of learning, means the learning would be totally under control by the learner only. Here the teachers will not control anything. Then collaborative reflection, there is a possibility to collaborate with the different groups, different institution, different social medias. In different social media groups or sources, they can collaborate and they can reflect. Learner self perception and professional development, they are extremely helpful, that learners self perception and professional development could be possible through this heutagogical approach. Critical thinking and reflection, that is possible in heutagogical approach, that is what they have found. Reflective practice was found to be helpful and more controlled. Reflecting on the learning experiences, whatever they have learned, and their reflection also, then they can, it is seen, it is observed. Then relating these experiences to professional practices helped keep learning motivated to learn, means whatever they have learned, which will give more motivation to learn more and more, to connect with other learners and to continue with other process. This pedagogy or this approach will help to connect the learner with the other groups, the other communities, other institutions, and these avenues, these scopes they have found in their research work. So, with this I would like to conclude here. Thank you.